A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus took Peter, John, and James and went up the mountain to pray. While he was praying, his face changed in appearance, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, two men were conversing with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his exodus that he was going to accomplish in Jerusalem. Peter and his companions had been overcome by sleep, but becoming fully awake, they saw his glory and the two men standing with him. As they were about to part from him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But he did not know what he was saying. While he was still speaking, a cloud came and cast a shadow over them, and they became frightened when they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my chosen son, listen to him." After the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. They fell silent and did not at that time tell anyone what they had seen. The Gospel of the Lord. Transfiguration. Transfiguration. Today's gospel gives us the story of the transfiguration of Jesus. In this gospel story, Jesus invites 3 of his closest disciples, Peter, John, and James, to go up the mountain with him. And while there, Jesus is transformed in their presence, transfigured. What is that? What is that? The best I can describe it is that Jesus is transformed temporarily into what he will be like after Easter, his risen body. Transformed temporarily into that. On the mountain, he's joined by Moses and Elijah. Of course, in a sense, Moses represents the law, and Elijah, the prophets. But they too are clothed in glory. They are in risen glory. Remember, of course, that Moses had gone up the mountain, Mount Sinai, to receive the 10 Commandments, and Elijah found refuge, perhaps on the same mountain, during his lifetime. Well, we can ask, why? What is this all about? Well, in the gospel story, we're told, or they're discussing, the 3 of them, that Jesus is going to pass through his exodus in Jerusalem. A passing through. He's going to go through his passion, his suffering, and his death on the cross. And his disciples, they're going to face the shock of seeing this happen to their beloved leader. The transfiguration, however, then gives them a vision of the future glory, vision of what will come to pass in the future, the triumphant risen life that Jesus himself will experience, and also the 3 disciples at a later date. So this will give them the heart, the courage to face the trials, temptations, and troubles that lie ahead between this time and that glorious moment in the future. So what? So what? You know, it's a nice story. Okay, fine, okay. What has that got to do with you or me? Any of you here in the church? Any of you watching on television? What could possibly have this meaning, can this have for you? Well, I'd like to tell you a story from my earlier life. For 8 years, I was pastor of St. Thomas Aquinas University Parish in Boulder, Colorado. I don't know how many of you have been to Boulder, but it's a beautiful city. It's about half the size of Grand Rapids, but it's nestled right up against the Rocky Mountains. Our church was actually, if you look down the street, Aurora Street, 1 mile, the Rocky Mountains began like a wall at the end of the street. And this provided many wonderful hiking trails and mountain trails to experience. And I took full advantage of all of that. And in fact, I'd actually climbed many of the peaks there around Boulder. However, there was one peak that stood out. Wherever you were in the southern part of the city, you looked up and you could see this. It had a sharp peak, and it just seemed to dominate the southern side of the city as a kind of challenge. I'd climbed these lesser peaks, but there was the big one staring me in the face. So one day, Kathy All, who was our director of liturgy in the parish then, we talked about this and decided that we were going to try to reach the peak, to climb to the top of Bear Peak. So we picked a day, showed up the Center for Atmospheric Research where the trail began, and kept moving ourselves up the trail. We walked, it was rocky, there were a lot of trees. We walked and went up and up and up and up. And we finally came to kind of a swampy area and said, well, let's stop for lunch. And we stopped for lunch, and we're kind of tired, and well, we gave up. We gave up. We gave up. But the challenge was still there, whatever. So later on, I said, I'm going to try that one more time. I got there earlier this time, and I made my way, I could make myself go at least past wherever Kathy and I had stopped before. And I did. And I kept going a little further. Then all of a sudden, to my surprise, the trail made a sharp V. And I turned around that trail and looked up. There was the peak. What I hadn't realized, in that whole first part of the trail, we had lost sight of the peak. The trees and whatever else covered it over, and so you couldn't see it. But once you rounded that corner, there it was, and you're more than halfway. And so right there, I could begin to gather strength, and I did. I went up, and I reached the peak. Well, okay, what is the point of that story? Well, it's important, I think, for us to have a vision of the goal. It really helps if you can see the peak. Now, probably none of us are going to have anything like the transfiguration experience that Jesus and his 3 disciples had on that mountainside. But, our faith tells us something about that glorious destiny that awaits us. The idea of the human person transformed in the risen life, Right now, we're going through Lent. It's a Lent. And Lent isn't just a liturgical season. In a certain sense, our lives are a kind of Lent. There are troubles, trials, temptations, difficulties, sickness. We all experience these in one way or another. But the Easter story, the Lenten story, tells us there's Easter at the end of it, okay? So this gives us a clue or maybe even a bit of a vision of what that future is that awaits us. The glory, the transfiguration, the risen life that awaits each one of us if we persevere. St. Paul, in today's second reading, says, the Lord Jesus Christ will change our lowly body to conform with his glorified body. And that, I see, is the great news, the great hope that we see in today's scriptures.